Well, First Lady Joe Biden traveled to Tampa Monday, where she said her husband, President Joe Biden, was all in for another 4 years in office.
Joe has made it clear that he's all in. The Supreme Court ruled that there are virtually no limits on what a president can do. Our democracy cannot withstand a Trump presidency with virtually no limits.
Speaking at an American Legion post, she also said her husband considers support of the military and veterans a sacred obligation that she contended contrasts with former President Donald Trump's views about veterans. The visit came as President Biden tries to convince voters that he can beat former President Trump in November. Biden has faced a mountain of criticism after his poor debate performance last month. An increasing number of Democratic politicians and donors have called for the 81-year-old to drop out of the race. And President Biden held a press conference at the end of the NATO summit on Thursday, and he gave some detailed answers, but he also got confused about his vice president's name.
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there.
So, Shelley, what are local Democrats in Tampa that you talked to saying about whether or not President Biden should stay in the race?
There are some who are calling for him to step aside in favor of a younger, more energetic candidate. But for the most part, I think local Democrats are like me, which is to say agnostic about who the candidate is. Because when you elect a president, you elect more than the candidate themselves. You elect their administration, their platform, their privilege of nominating Supreme Court justices. And right now we have a choice between a civil, pluralistic society or an authoritarian fascist platform. So as far as I'm concerned, I really, it doesn't matter to me whether Biden stays in or whether another candidate takes over. I think to the extent that there are calls for another candidate to take over, it's because people do believe that there may be more energy in terms of getting out the vote for a new candidate. But I don't think anybody feels that Biden can't do the job because he's supported by a great administration.
Kimberly, have there been any defections from the congressional ranks, the Democratic congressional ranks in Florida?
Not at all. In fact, those who have said things about it have said that they are very much behind Biden. There are others, I'll admit, who are remaining quiet, and so maybe they're just kind of keeping their powder dry. You know, there was a sense that if the NATO press conference had gone poorly yesterday, that several Democrats, not just from Florida, but from, you know, many states, and we don't even know who they are, would have written a letter saying it was time to step down. But there was nothing really, you know, obviously there was some switching of names, but there was nothing in the performance of President Biden last night that really, to a lot of people, drew like an okay, it's time to push him out of the race or anything like that. It was more of a status quo. A lot of people are relieved, but mostly the party, the state party, is standing by him, and then congressional Democrats are either gung-ho about supporting him or just staying silent for now.
Yeah. Brittany, what about young Republicans that you talked to? What are they saying about the Joe Biden campaign?
Yes, well, the fact that we're even here discussing how, oh, he did okay, he didn't screw up that bad, I mean, is extremely disappointing to a young person who's looking forward to the next generation of leadership. We shouldn't have a president that we're waiting for the next shoe to drop. We're waiting for him to say something wrong on an international stage every single day, right? That's not portraying leadership. That's not portraying the strength of the United States anywhere in the world. And that's what we're seeing as young people. Our futures are on the line. I mean, if something happens in Russia or in the Middle East or something like that, like, we're the ones that are going to have to go and fight for that. So we need a younger president who we, one, can trust is not going to make the United States look weak and look feeble. And we need someone, like you said, you're voting for the administration. Well, you're also voting for the man. He's the one that has to sit in the room with those other leaders, and we have to know and be confident that he's capable of doing that. And right now, young, not just young Republicans, young people in general don't feel confident that Joe Biden can do that.
Trump is 3 years younger.
He acts a lot younger, though.
Did young Republicans have a debate, have a NATO summit press conference watch party?
Not for the press conference, but we did have a debate watch party, and it got very rowdy because, as we know, Joe Biden made a lot of gaffes, and a lot of things just were very comical and entertaining for us. So we had a great time. You know, Donald Trump was as expected, and Joe Biden came out, you know, we expected him to act that way, but a lot of people didn't. So, we had a great time that night.
Wendy, President Biden has been here already. Joe Biden was here on Monday. This is the I-4 corridor. Back when Florida was competitive, this was the area that you had to win in order to turn the state. Why do you think the Biden campaign even spends any time in Tampa?
Well, that's sort of one of the things that I noticed about Joe Biden's appearance here. This was a tour of battleground states, North Carolina, Georgia, and Tampa, which, as you noted, has been in the past the epicenter of the swing state of Florida. The Biden campaign is paying at least some attention to Florida, significant amount.
They think there's a chance that they could do some damage to Trump in Florida?
I'm not going to engage in reading their minds, but they're acting like they think they can. Maybe it's just because they want to force Trump to play here, to work here. Maybe it's because they want to force Trump to spend money here. I don't know, but they are showing signs that they think it's worth their while to send their people here. Mm-hmm. One thing I wanted to say about the reporting on Biden's gaffes or slips or whatever, to me this is a really good example of one of the problems of national political reporting. Reporters are always extremely reluctant to break a touchy topic. John Kennedy's sexual escapades, Franklin Roosevelt's incapacity. But once it's broken, they leap all over it. And anything that suggests, that falls into the narrative, suddenly becomes a big story. You use the wrong word for somebody, and suddenly it's a big international story. And to me, that's at least part of what is happening here. And you've seen this in the past. The false narrative that Gerald Ford was clumsy. That meant every time he stubbed his toe, it was a national story.
Mm-hmm. And other important issues get shoved aside.
Yes.
Yeah. All right.